So a 4-year-old boy was just learning to ride his new two-wheel bike, and he rode it behind the family van just as his mother was backing up. Struck and killed. 1 second, one way or the other, and the child would still be alive. And now his family must deal with the inevitable questions of why. This past week, a 9-year-old boy was killed when a snowbank fell on him up near Orangeville. Small plane crashes in northern Ontario. Husband is killed. Wife, 3 small children. Christmas Day, a family is driving to visit Grandma. A patch of black ice, an oncoming vehicle, and the mother is killed instantly. 18-year-old student at Brock, walking across campus on a Monday afternoon, collapses of a brain aneurysm. Bright, polite, studious child, only child, dead within 10 hours. BBC News reported that 250,000 people, 250,000 people died in Somalia between 2010 and 2012 of starvation. Half of those are children under the age of 5. Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, World War I, World War II, Rwanda. I could go on for hours with the tragedies this world sees. Why? Why do the innocent suffer? Why do the innocent die? Why does God allow such things to happen? Why? That's what Job wanted to know. He'd been a good guy. First chapter, God and the adversary, Satan, they're having a conversation. God says, hey, have you seen my servant Job? He is upright, he's wonderful. That's where all these tragedies came. Satan went, yeah, well, sure, look at you, blessed him like crazy. He'd had all this stuff. As I'd mentioned, his kids all killed in a house fire, lost everything. And he says, my days are without hope. Job wishes he was dead. Let the day perish that I was born. Job asks, why? Is there any light? Why is there even light given to those in misery? Why? Why is this stuff happening to me? I'm a good guy. Now, this is a very dangerous topic for me to preach on. Anytime a preacher, or anyone for that matter, attempts to speak about God and human suffering, well, we risk sounding like Job's friends. Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, Elihu, if I got that right, preachers all. Job's their congregation. In the face of all his loss and his loathsome sores and his dead children, what do his friends say to him? Eliphaz says, now Job, think who was ever innocent who was punished. I mean, if you're being punished, obviously you're not innocent, you did something wrong. And that's a standard human thought, right? We admire people who are successful. Obviously they're good people. Right? You're poor, well, then you're lazy. Get off your butt and get to work. It's the way we humans have been thinking for thousands of years, and you hear it here. Bildad says, are you suggesting that God is unjust? If you were pure and upright, God would answer you with prosperity. Not happening, obviously, you're not pure and upright. Zophar says, how dare you ask such questions? Why should God take the time to explain himself to a liar like you? Nice friends, huh? Do they sound a bit insensitive? Well, listen to some of the things that we say to people who are suffering. Don't worry, you can always have another baby. Well, it's God's will, you'll just have to accept it. God never gives to us more than we can handle. Time heals all. We mean well. But just listen to those platitudes. They're like a string bridge across a bottomless abyss. Try saying any of those things to those parents in the emergency room with their 18-year-old child struck down with a brain aneurysm. I was there. I had absolutely nothing to say. All I could do was sit with them. Because there is nothing that can be said that's going to be helpful. So usually, if we're smart, we don't say that kind of stuff. On one woman, on hearing someone say to her, well, it's on the death of her son, saying some friend said, well, it's God's will. The mother said, listen to yourself. If this is the will of God, then I want nothing to do with that God. I'd have to agree with her. So we don't, if we're smart, don't say stuff like that. We tend to mumble things like, well, I'll be thinking about you. And you know what? That's more helpful. I think that's actually more helpful. I mean, what else is there to say? Faced with accidents and untimely death, terrible disease, or human evil, what can we say? Job wasn't impressed with his friend's answers. He says, you're all miserable comforters, he cries. Shall your vain words have no end? I'm sick of your sermons. God has broken me. God has taken me by the neck and shaken me to pieces. Will God hear my cry? Oh, that he would hear me, that the Almighty would answer me. Now, at this point, for a lot of us, Job almost becomes a hero. Because he does what a lot of us would really like to do. He gets up off his ash heap, he clenches his fist, shakes it at God, and yells at God, says, I want to know why. Why is this happening to me? What have I ever done to deserve this? It takes a while before God answers. 38 chapters to be exact. But then God does arrive. And when God does arrive, he never actually answers Job's questions. Nor is he soft-spoken or sympathetic. Rather, he bellows out of a whirlwind, rhetorical, insolent questions. Who's this that darkens counsel with words without knowledge? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? And God goes on and on for the next 2 chapters. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Has the rain a father? Who begot the drops of dew? Can you hunt the prey for the lion? Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Do you give the horses might? And on and on and on. In essence, God says, and not too politely, shut up. And Job does just that. Behold, I am a non-entity, he says. What else can I say? I put my hand over my big mouth. I've spoken once, I won't speak twice. Dumb, numb, stupefied resignation. What else can Job say after God's loud bombast? Can you make a sunrise? Where were you, Mr. Smarty Pants, when I made an ostrich? I suppose you can make a giraffe. What are we supposed to say to questions like that? Because God is us. Job is us. What are we supposed to say? We can't say anything. And God knows that. So is that it? In the face of all our whys, God basically says, buzz off, it's none of your business. Really, God? It's my life that this is happening to, and you're telling me to buzz off, it's none of my business? Well, if that's the final answer, then you know what? We are to be pitied. Because anything goes. Any answer is good enough. Whatever we dream up as an answer to why this is happening is good as any other answer. If we haven't got some kind of answer from God. But that isn't the end of the story. Chapter 40. So we basically slapped Job upside the head for 2 chapters. And then in chapter 40, God says, will you overturn my justice? Will you make me out to be evil in order to sustain your innocence? And then God says, behold, behemoth, which I have made, even as I made you. Can you draw Leviathan out with a fish hook? Can you put a hook in Leviathan's nose? Behemoth, Leviathan. 2 dark, ugly creatures known in Canaanite mythology, primeval forces of nature that embodied great power, the beast and the serpent. You see what God's done? He's taken them from the world of the giraffe and the ostrich and the ox, the natural world, and he shifted the discussion over to the great beast and the torturous serpent. I think God reveals to Job and us a little bit of what it's like to be God in this universe. God and the world are not as Job and his friends thought. The universe and the world are not a flat world of easy moral equations, tit for tat rules and rewards. God shows Job a deeper, darker, confusing creation, deep down where Behemoth and Leviathan are. The Behemoth and Leviathan, the beast and the serpent, give us a hint of the disorder and dark chaos that God wrestles with. Now, Job has cried out that the chaos and the injustice is overwhelming his life, and he's desperate to sustain his own innocence. Fine. Fine, sustain your own innocence. But how much greater is the struggle that God has? Now, this doesn't answer our why questions. Wasn't the answer Job was looking for. It's not the answer we look for when we're asking why do these things happen. But it does give us a picture of the reality in which God struggles. Yeah, you're thinking, God doesn't struggle. According to this, God struggles. Human suffering is only part of the chaos, a little corner of the chaos that God battles with constantly. So God and Job have something in common after all. Like Job, God is busy attempting to bring some sense out of the craziness, some order out of the chaos. And like Job, God's not willing to give up the battle. For some reason, and we don't know why, Behemoth and Leviathan are part and parcel of our world. Even God's rule does not destroy them, at least not yet. But God will keep them in check. It's a vision of a world that is complex, not simple. A world full of seemingly pointless animals like the ostrich and the giraffe. It's a world of mosquitoes and malaria. It's a big, intricate world and universe, and we're part of it. And God says, I made Behemoth, and I made you. Which suggests that Job should maybe look at himself. Not only at the chaotic, confusing world, but we all need to look a bit inward. God says, Behemoth, the beast, yeah, I made him, but I made you too. And sometimes I don't know which beast causes me more trouble, Behemoth or you. Of all the confusing, chaotic, dark, evil creatures in the world, are there any so confusing, any more confusing than we human beings? The trouble that God has with the beast and the serpent, probably nothing compared with the trouble he has with the human race. What other creature could be said? Genesis chapter 8, the thoughts of his heart are evil from the days of his youth. God made us. God also made Behemoth and Leviathan, and God continues to struggle with all of us. So now Job says, I heard you, but now my eyes see you. Previously, Job had heard of a God, a simple God, a God who sat around handing out justice in neat, orderly little packets. You're bad, I'm going to smack you. You're good, oh, here, have a few more camels. If you're good, you get rewarded. If you're bad, you get punished. That was the worldview. But now that was Job's view and his friends' view. But now Job sees a different picture. He'd heard about that one. Now he sees a God who is busy, struggling with the chaos, struggling with the suffering, struggling with the darkness. We see it this morning in bread and wine, broken body, flowing blood. God in Jesus suffering. Jesus, where we put him on the cross, Behemoth, Leviathan, and us, between two thieves, looking down on a garbage dump. Now, none of this answers our questions why. The whys may never be answered. Lots of times we like to think, oh boy, I'm going to get the answers when I get to heaven, when I get face to face with God. He's got a lot to answer for. I'm going to want to know why this happened and why that happened. We might never know. Don't know. What we do know is that we can face the world and the confusion and the chaos and the suffering from a different perspective. We have a God who struggles with the chaos as we do, who promises not only to defy it, but ultimately to overcome it. Jesus, on the cross, embracing our chaos, pushing back the darkness with his body and his blood. A fellow sufferer, a fellow questioner, God with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God.